Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Tabakit.
Could the acting Prime Minister state whether the government is taking any special measures to monitor cargo, as well as ships, including fishing vessels and their crew arriving from China, Japan, and Korea?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In addition to existing travel restrictions for persons travelling within 14 days from the countries that have so far been identified and thermal scanning, the government has also implemented enhanced surveillance measures at our seaports and airports. These include passenger and crew manifests with more information giving full travel history for passengers and crew to allow us to determine the risk of exposure. Details of the last 10 port of calls have also been required. The Maritime Services Division has also communicated to captains to do active surveillance aboard ships. This is in addition to the regular maritime declaration of health, which is incumbent upon vessels and captains of vessels.
Supplemental, Member for Tabakit.
Mr. Acting Prime Minister, do you have any port health officials going on the boats to do either visual or using equipment to do some kind of testing on a random basis, despite what might be communicated to you by the ship captain or what have you?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm advised by the Minister of Health that this is happening. Port health officers are visiting vessels to conduct additional surveillance.
Supplemental again, Member for Tabakit.
Are they doing so on the visits? Are they just doing a visual observation, or are they using equipment to randomly test people?
Prime Minister.
Is by the Minister of Health that they are currently looking at the declarations submitted by the captains and also interviewing the captains and the ship's officers. Doctors, I apologize, doctors.
I recognize the member for Carney East.
Honourable Acting Prime Minister, what's the position of the government on the passenger cruise ships in terms of allowing passengers to disembark or refusing their admission into our seaports?
Acting Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this question asked about cargo, fishing vessels, and crew. I would not want to make any definitive statement about cruise ship vessels at this time. I am sure that that question can be posed in due course, but I would not want to speak out of turn because the question posed to the Prime Minister speaks to cargo and fishing vessels and crew.
Carney East.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, Honourable Acting Prime Minister, you would see the question says cargo as well as ships. And that's in that context I ask you about passenger ships. And you're evading the question.
Member for Couva North. Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 2. Given there's a shortage of N95 masks, could the acting Prime Minister indicate why the government sent 13,000, that's a typo, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not 35,000, 13,000 it's supposed to be, 13,000 N95 masks to China?
Honourable Acting Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm advised that the question is based on a false premise. It was not the government that sent that donation of masks to China. It was the private sector. So the question is based on a false premise. However, I'm advised by the Minister of Health that there is no shortage of N95 masks in the public sector. And I want to repeat that the 13,000 masks were sent by the private sector, not the government.
Supplemental, Member
Minister, are you aware that it is your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Dennis Moses, who made that statement to the media where he said 13,000 N95 masks was sent to China to help?
Prime Minister. Prime Minister, please.
Mr. Deputy, sorry. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't know why the member wants to ask and answer the question. The fact of the matter is that there is no statement by any government minister that the government sent masks to China. The fact of the matter is masks were sent, and they were sent by the private sector.
Supplemental, member for Couva.
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, are you aware in an article dated Wednesday, February the 12th, 2020, a Guardian article, Minister Dennis Moses was quoted as saying 13,600 masks were sent to China to help combat the COVID virus?
Well, again, Honourable Prime Minister acting.
Firstly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's no such post as Deputy Prime Minister. So I am not the Deputy Prime Minister. And secondly, that comment made by the Honourable Member refers to a newspaper article which may or may not be accurate, but even, let's assume it is, that does not indicate that the government sent the masks. And I want to reiterate my information that the masks were sent by the private sector.
You can't stop that. Why? You can't understand that. No, he didn't.
I recognize the member for Carney East.
Honourable Acting Prime Minister, in your statement a while ago that the state could be assured that there's no shortage of these masks, could you give an indication to the House what is the quantity that you may have available for use by healthcare personnel and workers altogether?
Acting Prime Minister.
Firstly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I didn't say any of the things that the Honourable Member said I said. I said there is no shortage in the public sector. I find this a little strange what is happening today. The member for Couva South clearly is aware that the Minister of Foreign Affairs referred to a shipment of masks, not a government shipment, but mixing up. And now the member for Carney East, or whatever it is now putting words in my mouth. I want to repeat, I have been advised by the member for St. Joseph, the Honourable Minister of Health, there is no shortage of masks in the public sector. I'm advised by the Minister of Health there are 23,000 masks in stock, and 25,000 additional masks are on their way and are expected to arrive in Trinidad and Tobago within the next week or so.
Supplemental, Carney East.
When you say in stock, Acting Prime Minister, is it held by the Ministry of Health and given to the regional health authorities, or where is it stockpiled?
I wouldn't entertain that question at this time. You could use otherwise. Member for Tabakit.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Honourable Acting Prime Minister state what specific checks for the coronavirus are being done and by whom on persons arriving at Cedras as well as Chagaramas and Brighton ports?
Acting Prime Minister.
The enhanced surveillance that I referred to in the answer to the first question, which include examination of the passenger and crew manifest, examining the full travel history of passengers and crew, and also visits by Port Health to the vessels, examination of the declarations made by the captain, interviews with the ship's doctors, and so on. All of those enhanced surveillance measures are in place at all legal ports of entry.
Supplemental, Tabakit.
Prime Minister, absolutely and unequivocally certain that there is Port Health Authority, for example, in Cedras, and that checks are being done in Cedras, even with respect to the boats that are arriving from Venezuela with scrap iron?
Acting Prime Minister.
I can only go on what I'm told by the relevant officials. I have to report what is told to me by the Minister of Health, Minister of National Security, and so on.
Supplemental for Naprimo.
Thank you. Could the minister then indicate how many vessels have been checked at Cedros over the past 72 hours, and by whom?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have not yet developed those superhuman powers of detection, but I will get the answer.
Member for Tabakit, you have a supplemental again? Member for Tabakit.
My question asked, by whom were the checks being done? Is the acting Prime Minister aware that this CMOH for Superior, in the Superior Regional Corporation area, had asked for quarters at Cedros in order to house persons to do checks, and that those quarters were not provided, and therefore there are no personnel from the CMOH doing checks in Cedros?
And the question is?
The acting Prime Minister aware?
Honourable Prime Minister, acting.
I think it's a bit of a stretch, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to expect me to be aware of that. I'm not aware.
Member for Princetown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, through you to the Acting Prime Minister. Could the Acting Prime Minister indicate whether the Cabinet has considered establishing an interministerial committee to address specific plans related to treating with coronavirus, now COVID-19, should it reach our shores?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yes, as already announced by the Minister of Health, a ministerial or interministerial committee has been appointed. The committee is chaired by the Chief Medical Officer and includes representatives from various arms of national security, the protective services, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labour, Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Finance, Maritime Services Division, the Airports Authority, Civil Aviation Authority, Port Authority, the Tobago House of Assembly, the ODPM, and TIMA. And the committee has already held its first meeting on the 5th of March.
Supplemental, Member for Princetown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Through you to the Honourable Acting Prime Minister. Prime Minister, could you indicate whether or not it is the remit of the committee to start engaging stakeholders with respect to consultations on pursuing matters related to being prepared in anticipating whether or not the coronavirus reaches our shores, in terms of stakeholder consultations?
I'm advised by the Minister of Health, yes, of course. That will be done.
I recognize Carine East. Princetown, you'll give way? Okay. Carine East, I recognize.
Honourable Prime Minister, is there any active consideration by the government or the Ministry of Health to appoint a point person who will indicate to the country on a daily basis, on a regular basis if needed, what's the situation of the country in relation to the coronavirus?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As has occurred over the last several days, the official spokesmen and point persons, if you want to use that terminology, with respect to this issue, are the Honourable Minister of Health and the Chief Medical Officer, both of whom have been authorized and are making official statements with respect to the coronavirus situation on a daily basis, and also taking responsibility for coordination and action with respect to coronavirus.
Supplemental, Carine East, member.
Will the Acting Prime Minister indicate to the country, as far as the coronavirus testing is concerned, whether the Ministry of Health has taken into consideration any other areas other than CAFA for the testing of the coronavirus? Any other laboratories?
Honourable Prime Minister acting.
I'm advised by the Minister of Health that at this time, CAFA is the only reference laboratory for the testing for the coronavirus. Even for the private sector. It's the only reference laboratory that is, I'm hearing it could be for other Caribbean countries as well. But in Trinidad and Tobago, it is the only reference laboratory that is authorized and credited, if you want to use that terminology, to test for the coronavirus. And CARFA, for those who don't know, because I get this question all the time, where is CARFA? CARFA is at 16 to 18 Federation Park in Port of Spain.
Supplemental, Carney East.
Be allowed, Acting Prime Minister, would the Honourable Prime Minister indicate to the country what is the capacity and the efficiency of CAF to do these testing? Approximately how much could be done per day in case there is a surge of testing required?
Acting Prime Minister.
I am advised by the Honourable Minister of Health that so far, based on the caseload at this time, the turnaround time is 4 hours.
Member for Couva South. Next question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Acting Prime Minister state the purpose of the Prime Minister's current trip to Ghana, as well as the persons comprising the official delegation?
Prime Minister.
Much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, and also member for Dega Martin West, was invited to be the special guest of honor at the 63rd Independence Celebrations of Ghana. This is a very high, esteemed honor and was accepted by the Honourable Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is also using this opportunity to pursue a number of collaborative arrangements with Ghana, such as an air service agreement and potential expansion of opportunities for partnership in the energy sector, the agriculture sector, the financial services sector, and trade. The delegation includes Mrs. Rowley, the Minister of Public Utilities and his spouse, Dr. Aline, advisor to the Prime Minister on matters of agriculture, security officers, the press secretary, and a videographer.
Supplemental, Couva South.
Could the Acting Prime Minister inform this House what is the financial cost to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, inclusive of support staff?
I will not entertain that question. Supplemental, Naprima, proceed.
Could the Acting Prime Minister indicate why no technical staff expertise were part of the mission to inform the discussions that took place? Or is it another situation like occurred in Houston last year that created?
Member, which question would you like to be answered?
No technical support staff accompanied, given this level of discussions and the areas of discussion?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The member for Naparima is approaching the age which was a subject of query by the member for Oropouche West, and therefore should know, because I don't buy the argument of the member for Oropouche West that as you approach the age of 70, you have some intellectual faculty problems. I don't buy that argument. But the member for Naparima is approaching the age of 70, and therefore should be very familiar with the esteemed Dr. John Aline, a renowned agriculturist and technical expert in agriculture. And I just called his name, Dr. Aline, advisor to the Prime Minister on matters of agriculture. I want to repeat, Dr. Aline is a distinguished technical expert in agriculture, world-renowned.
Supplemental, member for Naprima.
Is the Acting Prime Minister aware that I am younger than his Prime Minister, his boss, to whom he reports? And the question is, give us, since energy matters was a significant component of the discussions, what does an agricultural expert have to do with the energy matters that are critical to this economy?
Acting Prime Minister.
Allow me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to correct the record. What I find today is that members opposite are making up their own reality. I never said that energy was a major component of the visit. What I said is that the Prime Minister is taking the opportunity, whilst in Ghana, to be the guest of honor at the 63rd anniversary celebrations of Ghana, which is a distinct honor
while he's there accepting that honor, he's taking the opportunity to explore cooperative and collaborative arrangements in a number of areas, and I listed them: agriculture, financial services, trade, and energy. At no time did I say a major thrust of the Prime Minister's visit was to deal with matters relating to energy. What I want to repeat is that the Prime Minister has specifically taken Dr. John Aline, advisor on agriculture, and if the honourable member was reading the newspapers, he would see that there's already been a news report that Trinidad and Tobago is to benefit from a new stock of ground provision from Ghana, which is clearly as a result of the technical assistance provided by Dr. John Ali.
Member for Naprima.
Given the wide range of areas discussed and the fact that we ran into problems with respect to bad negotiations in Houston last year, why only in agriculture do we have the necessary expertise, and why not the other areas that are also important?
I will not entertain that question. Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Acting Prime Minister, given the presence of the Minister of Public Utilities on this official delegation, could you indicate to this House if any memorandum of understanding will be signed between the government of Ghana and Trinidad and Tobago to improve the water supply in this country, which citizens have been suffering for over the last 5 years?
I will not entertain this question at this time. I recognize the member for Oropouche East.
Today, Acting Prime Minister, having regard to the recently concluded elections in Guyana, can the Acting Prime Minister confirm whether or not this government has recognized the Granger administration as the new government of Guyana?
Acting Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it may very well be that the member for Oropouche East has better information than the Office of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We in Trinidad and Tobago, in the Office of the Prime Minister, have not yet been informed as to the nature of the new government of Guyana. As far as I can tell from anecdotal information and informal reports, that matter is still being determined. And since it is still being determined, the question is premature.
I recognize the member for Shogunas West. Please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the Honourable Acting Prime Minister aware of a joint statement released by the heads of mission of United States, Britain, Canada, and European Union about credible allegations of fraud in the elections in Guyana, and they have called upon the incumbent President Granger to avoid a transition of government which they believe would be unconstitutional and would be based on a vote tabulation process that lacked credibility and transparency. Is the Prime Minister aware of this position of our significant allies?
That question at this time. Supplemental, Oropouche, proceed.
Thank you very much. Honourable Acting Prime Minister, in light of statements by significant nations regarding this election, is the government of Trinidad and Tobago prepared as well to issue a statement based upon developments in Guyana, where they have now arrived at a conclusion that the electoral process was indeed fraud?
I will not entertain that question. Member for Naprimo.
Yes, thanks. Mr. Acting Prime Minister, given that CARICOM has issued a statement indicating that they are dissatisfied with the results of the election, as indicated by the Prime Minister Granger. What is the position of our government with respect to the CARICOM statement on the matter?
Honourable Prime Minister acting.
Firstly, I would not accept anything that the member for Naparipa says without checking it first. Firstly. And secondly, unlike the UNC, the PNM does not interfere in the internal affairs of another sovereign state.
Supplemental or Puchis.
Thank you very much, Acting Prime Minister, for this statement that the government will not interfere. Are you aware that a minister in your government has already pronounced on this matter?
Member for Princetown. Next question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Honourable Acting Prime Minister, could the Acting Prime Minister indicate a definitive date when the first tranche of VAT bonds would be made available, since he publicly stated that it would be done in the first quarter of 2020?
Acting Prime Minister.
Consistent with my public statement, the target date is the end of the first quarter in 2020.
Supplemental, Princetown.
Deputy Speaker, I think that the Honourable Acting Prime Minister got the question wrong, because it asks for a specific definitive date, and you indicated that it will come in the last quarter. Your answer does not give us a definitive date, and that's what the question is asking. So I'm asking for a definitive date.
Right, so your question is a definitive date. Your supplemental. Acting Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as far as I know, the end of the first quarter is the 31st of March. As far as I know. And therefore, I repeat, the target date for the issue of interest-bearing government bonds to deal with VAT arrears is the end of the first quarter, which is the 31st of March. That's the target date.
Princetown, will you give way to Carney East? Or I recognize the member for Carney East.
Would the Acting Prime Minister indicate what would be the value of the first tranche of bonds and what would be the total value of the bonds? The question asks the first tranche. I'm asking what would be the value of the first tranche of the bonds and the total value of all the bonds.
In that question now, sir.
First tranche of the bonds. Is it incorporated in the question?
Two questions. Which question?
Answer
Again, please.
What is the value of the first tranche of bonds?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You know, there's a general rule that you should not ask questions where the answer is available in the public domain. And if the honourable member was here, which I think he was, because he asked me a supplemental, when the member for Pointe-a-Pierre asked me the exact same question, I told the member for Pointe-a-Pierre and the honourable member for Carney East that the first tranche is going to be $1 billion. I already said that. It's reported in the papers. It's reported in the Hansard. So why ask the question?
Chief Whip, your member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, with respect to the purchase of 3 reciprocating gas compressors trains by the National Gas Company sometime between 2016 and 2018, could the Acting Prime Minister state what was the total cost of this purchase, known as the Beachfield Project?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm advised that the total cost of purchase of the 3 reciprocating compressors was $14 million. These compressors were intended to guarantee a steady supply in the domestic market in the Cassia field if the BP chalk compression went down. However, BP has desanctioned the Cassia compression project and it is no longer required. As such, NGC is in the process of sending out proposals for an entity to purchase the compressors.
Supplemental, Member for Sugarnas West.
Thank you. Could the Honourable Acting Prime Minister indicate the cost of purchase of these compressors and okay, pay attention.
All right.